Plate 5. Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained, and the restrainer, or reason, usurps its place and governs the unwilling. Oh, hello there. I was just setting up a skit in which I pretended that you interrupted me while I was reading. Dr. Bauer's Office Hours here. Welcome back. In our last episode, we talked about how, according to Plato, we, or our souls, are divided up into three different elements. There's the part of us that seeks appetitive pleasures, that's food, intoxication, sex, and the money with which to get those things. The appetitive part of the soul. Our enjoyment of appetitive pleasures is something that we have in common with lots of other animals, no matter how simple. Then there's the spirited part of our soul, or our social drive, our drive to be appreciated, or our drive to be liked, or our drive to be popular, our concern with being celebrated by other people. That's the spirited part of the soul. And then finally, there's the part of us that's concerned with the overall calculated good, or what's good overall. So we, or our souls, are divided into these three distinct parts, these three distinct drives. For today's lesson, I want to take that bit of Platonic psychology and continue through the end of Book 4 and look at how Plato's psychology relates to, on one hand, the topic of akrasia, and on the other hand, to the topic of justice. And we'll soon see that Plato lays a foundation for claiming that being an honest and fair person directly connects up with your ability to be happy in life. So let's get started. For this lesson, it's helpful to keep the following study guide questions in mind and to maybe fill them out as you watch this video. First, must we have exactly three psychic parts according to Plato? Why or why not? Second, what is akrasia in ordinary terms, and why is it a puzzle? Third, how is Plato's division of the soul a solution to the puzzle of akrasia? Fourth, what is akrasia according to Plato in the Republic? Fifth, how are psychic parts related? What is ruling? Sixth, why, according to Plato, should the rational part rule the soul? Seventh, what kind of psychic structure does a just person have, according to Plato? Eighth, how does justice in the soul relate to akrasia? Hopefully those study guide questions will help you along as we cover this section of the Republic. Now, first off, must there be three parts? Is Plato committed to the view that there have to be three parts, say because of some numerological mysticism, or because he's antecedently committed to the city having three parts? No. Let's take a look at part of the text. At 443d, Socrates is discussing the person who has justice in their soul. He's discussing the just person, a person who's honest and fair. Socrates says, instead, he regulates well what is really his own, rules himself, puts himself in order, becomes his own friend, and harmonizes the three elements together just as if they were literally the three defining notes of an octave, lowest, highest, and middle, as well as any others that may be in between. Let's focus on that one more time, right at the end. Lowest, highest, and middle, as well as any others that may be in between. as well as any others that may be in between, that suggests that there may be others than the three in the octave. And since the octave is a metaphor for the soul itself, it seems that Plato, right here, is admitting that, yeah, there could be other parts to the soul. However, Plato does have Socrates and Glaucon proceed as though they have discovered all the parts of the soul, as though they have discovered three, and they have no reason to think that there are any more for now. This passage, it seems, is the for now in the text. So much for the necessity of there being three parts to the soul. Now, let's talk about akrasia just for a moment. Akrasia, the original Greek, is commonly translated as weakness of the will. Weakness of the will. Now, what's that? Well, let's go back to 431 in the text. This is, again, where Socrates asks whether the term self-mastery is ridiculous, specifically on the grounds that the person who is doing the mastering is also the person who is being mastered, which seems to entail the unacceptable contradiction that someone is stronger than themselves. There, Socrates again indicated that within the same person's soul there is a better thing and a worse one. Whenever the naturally better one masters the worse, this is called being master of oneself, or what we would call self-control. Weakness of the will, or akrasia, is the reverse of that phenomenon. If self-mastery or self-control is when the better thing in the soul masters the worse thing, weakness of the will would be when the worse thing masters the better one. In ordinary language, akrasia, or weakness of the will, is deliberately choosing something other than what you know to be the best. In other words, weakness of the will occurs when you know that one option is the best, you know that it's the best, and yet you choose another one. And you don't choose the other one on accident, and you don't choose the other one because you were forced. You choose it deliberately, consciously, on purpose, without coercion. There's the best option, there's an option that's not the best, and you deliberately choose the option which is not the best. That's weakness of the will. If that sounds all rather abstract, let's take a couple of perhaps familiar examples. You're out with your friends, perhaps you're at a club, perhaps you're at a bar, perhaps you're somewhere else at a party, but you're out with your friends and you're having a wonderful time, and you realize that because of your job or because of your school, you have to get up early in the morning. So early, in fact, that it would be more than prudent to leave the celebration and your friends and to go home. You know that the best option is to go home. You know that the best option is to turn in for the evening. But do you? No, you choose to stay out with your friends. You choose to continue the celebration. And as you do this, you are not coerced. You are not doing it on accident. And it is not as though you are ignorant of some crucial fact. You knowingly choose to stay out, even though you know the best option is to turn in for the night. There's one example. Or perhaps there's something unpleasant that you need to tell a friend. And the longer you wait to tell that friend, the worse it's going to be. The more that that friend is going to resent you, and the worse that people are going to think of you. You know that the best option is to tell them immediately. And yet, you don't want to. The pain of feeling the resentment and facing it is so great that you avoid what you know to be best. And as you avoid telling your friend the truth, it's not as though you're being coerced, and it's not as though you are ignorant of some crucial fact. It is precisely a situation in which you knowingly choose something other than what you know to be best. You know what you ought to be doing, and yet you do something else instead, on purpose. That is weakness of the will. So again, weakness of the will is deliberately or knowingly choosing other than what you know to be best. Now, akrasia, or weakness of the will, was a problem that Plato and the historical Socrates both wrestled with. a thorny problem precisely because, as we mentioned in the previous video, weakness of the will suggests that there is someone who is the person who has the will and that they are weaker than something. And also that there is someone who has the will who is stronger than something, and that it's the same will or the same person in both cases. Someone being stronger than themselves, right? That's one puzzle about weakness of the will. But in addition, there's some other puzzle too, and it's this. When we act acratically, we deliberately choose something. When we act acratically, what we choose is worse, and yet we do not deliberately choose what is worse. We don't go for what we take to be the worst of options. We do not purposively seek out the thing which we don't like as much. That doesn't make any sense. And yet weakness of the will seems to entail that very fact, that we deliberately go for the worse, that we deliberately seek the bad. That's unthinkable. We don't, right? How could you go for what you don't like? That doesn't make any sense. Now, as we saw last time, Plato's psychology poses a solution to both of these problems. On one hand, the puzzle of how something can be stronger than itself is solved by the very idea that the soul has parts to begin with. If the soul has parts, then the apparent fact of someone being stronger than themselves can be explained by saying that merely one part of that person is stronger than the other part of that person, right? So Plato's psychology can solve that first puzzle quite easily. But the second puzzle ingeniously gets solved as well. For if Plato is right about our drives, if Plato is right about the nature of the parts of our soul, that means that there isn't any part of us that goes for what is bad. There's not a single part of us, a single part of our psychology that deliberately seeks out something because we don't like it as much. No, no, no. It's just that while part of us does go for the overall calculated good, there are other parts of us that are independent of the good. They seek out some specific object regardless of whether it's good or bad at all, right? In the case of weakness of the will, in the case, say, where you postpone telling the truth to a friend, or you postpone going and turning in for the night because you're having so much fun, in those cases, it's not as though there's part of you that wants to stay out or wants to postpone the truth because that's the wrong thing, because that's the bad thing. There's no part of you that wants to pursue that course of action because it's worse. Rather, according to Plato, there's a part of you that wants to stay out or postpone the truth regardless of whether it's good or bad at all, right? In other words, it's not that there's a part of you that goes for the bad. There's just parts of you that go for something regardless of whether it's good. It's not that it goes for what's bad, it is value neutral. That's the idea. So in other words, Plato solves the puzzle of akrasia by claiming that the soul is divided into parts, and that when an individual appears to be stronger than themselves or weaker than themselves, that is one part of the soul being stronger than another part, and also that while none of these parts go for what is bad as such, two of them, at least two of them, are value neutral in their pursuits. They are value blind. Your hunger is not a drive which involves the consideration of whether it's good to eat. Your hunger is just the drive for food, as such, without any other extra calculative bells or whistles, right? Your hunger is value neutral. It doesn't go for what's bad, it's just value neutral. And Plato's division of the soul into value neutral and value sensitive parts is how he solves the puzzle of akrasia. Now, in ordinary terms, weakness of the will, or akrasia, is knowingly pursuing something that is not the best option. But in terms of Plato's psychology, how would we describe weakness of the will? We would describe it this way. Weakness of the will is when the rational part of the soul conflicts with some other part of the soul, and the other part is stronger and wins out, causing the entire soul to pursue the pleasure of the other part. In other words, according to Platonic psychology, weakness of the will is when there's a conflict between the rational part of the soul and another part of the soul, and the rational part loses. So now let's describe those examples in Plato's terms. Take the person who knows that they should be going home to turn in for the evening, but they're having so much fun partying that they want to stay out some more. Let's assume that their pleasure is an appetitive one. They're enjoying the dancing and the drinking and the substances and the general merriment in a bodily sense, not so much out there for the socializing. In that situation, the rational part of their soul, the part that wants the overall calculated good, is telling them to go home. The part of them that wants to go home, that knows that they should, is the soul's rational part. And the part of them that's saying, come on, it's not saying, do it because it's bad. It's just saying, I like this, right? That part, the appetitive part, is urging them to stay. So you have, on one hand, the appetitive part, and you have the rational part, and they are conflicting. The appetitive part is saying, stick around, have fun. The rational part is saying, don't stick around, don't keep having fun, go home. Now, if the person is weak-willed, according to Plato's definition, the rational part of the soul is going to lose that conflict. And in this case, the weak-willed person is not going to go home. They are going to act on their desire to stay out and keep partying and keep having fun. So the weak-willed person, in Plato's terms, acts on the part of the soul that conflicts with the rational part. That's the sense in which the rational part loses the conflict. Or take the person who is postponing the confession of a horrible truth to their friend. There's part of them that wants to tell them immediately. The part that knows that the longer they wait, the worse it's going to get, right? They have that judgment. Their desire for the overall calculated good, the rational part of the soul, is saying, tell them as soon as you can. But the part of them that doesn't like to be disliked, the part of them that doesn't want to face unpopularity or social shame, the part of them that wants everyone else to have a positive attitude towards them, the spirited part of the soul, says, no, don't tell them yet. I don't want to be disliked. So they are in conflict. There is the rational part of the soul that says, confess, and there is the spirited part of the soul that says, don't. Now, if they are weak-willed, by Plato's definition, reason should lose that conflict, and they will fail to confess the thing to their friend. They'll postpone it. So again, weakness of the will is when the person acts on the desire that conflicts with the rational part. That's the sense in which the rational part loses. Now, so far with our talk of winning and losing, and our talk of struggle, and our examples of Leontius and Odysseus, we've started to assume that the parts of the soul are related in certain ways, at least one of them antagonistic. Let's get more specific about how, according to Plato, the parts of the soul can be related. Specifically, let's talk about ruling, and turn to the text here. In addition to mastery or control, as we've already mentioned at 431, Socrates has quite a bit to say about one part ruling the soul and also ruling the other two parts once he and Glaucon take themselves to have discovered that the soul has three parts. At 441e, Socrates asks whether it is appropriate for the rationally calculating element to rule on certain grounds, and that people are called wise because of the small rational part that rules in them. And at 444d, Socrates characterizes justice and injustice as relations of mastering, being mastered, ruling, and being ruled. Now, what does this mean? We know from the context of Socrates' argument in the text that ruling can be characterized on an analogy with political ruling. And we also know from the examples of Odysseus and Leontius that ruling has to do with influencing behavior. The psychic part that rules is the one that the individual as a whole acts on. For specifics about ruling, however, we can turn to Book 9. At 580d5, Socrates claims that the soul is divided into three, and that the same holds of appetites and kinds of rule. Specifically, he says that there's an element with which a person learns, one with which he feels anger, and a third, which is multiform, has the appetites for food, drink, sex, and all the things that go along with them. These are the three parts of the soul as we outlined in Book 4. In addition to mentioning the appetitive part of the soul, Socrates also mentioned the spirited element. He calls it the victory-loving and honor-loving part. This, of course, is the spirited part of the soul. He adds that there's another element that we learn with that's always wholly straining to know where the truth lies, and that we should call it the learning-loving or philosophic part. After characterizing the parts of the soul, Socrates adds, and doesn't it rule in some people's souls, while one of the others, whichever it happens to be, rules in other people's? And isn't that why we say there are three primary types of people? Philosophic, victory-loving, and profit-loving, and also three kinds of pleasure, one assigned to each of them. The idea is that each part of the soul has its own way of being pleasured, and so, as there are three parts of the soul, there's a sense in which there are three families of pleasure, or three kinds of pleasure, or that all the pleasures there are can be divided into three most natural categories. And what it is for a psychic part to rule over the others, what it is for a psychic part to rule within a soul, is for the entire soul to pursue the pleasure of that part more than the others. So a psychic part rules in a soul just in case the entire soul aims at the pleasure of that psychic part over any other good. So if a person is ruled by their appetitive part, if they're ruled by their desire for food, drink, sex, and the money with which to get them, that means that overall they're going to pursue food, drink, sex, and the money with which to get them. And if there's anything which would get in the way of their pursuing those things, they will resist that. If the spirited part of the soul rules a soul, if it rules in someone, that means that person finds the pleasure of being popular and the pleasure of being liked more pleasant than any other thing. More pleasant than the pleasure of food, more pleasant than intoxication or sex or even knowledge. When you compare the pleasure of knowing about the universe or knowing what it's all about to the pleasure of being popular, of having people like you, well, this person in whom spirit rules, there's no contest. You go for the popularity. If the spirited part of the soul rules a soul, that means that the whole person prefers the pleasures of the spirited part to all the other pleasures. Likewise, someone who's ruled by their appetites, someone in whose soul the appetitive part rules, will find the pleasures of, well, partying, of food and intoxication and sex and money, those pleasures they'll find to be better than the pleasures of popularity, or better than the pleasures of knowing a lot of things and getting what life is all about. For the appetitively souled person, popularity is sure pleasant, yeah, but the reason why you'd want to seek it out, mainly, is because if you're popular, you can get more money, and you can get more goods that you can get with that money. Food, intoxication, sex, more partying. Let's take a look at how a socialite, whose soul is ruled by the spirited part, differs from, let's say, the partier, whose soul is ruled by the appetitive part. Both the partier and the socialite enjoy money. And both the partier and the socialite enjoy fame. They both enjoy both of those things. But they enjoy them very differently. For the socialite, money is good, but one of the main reasons why it's good is that when you have money, you can be famous. Money is good because it leads to fame, or at least that's one of the main good things about it. Fame is the most choice-worthy pleasure for the socialite. They're ruled by the spirited part of their soul. They want to be popular more than anything. And money, while good, the main reason why it's good is that if you've got money, you can be famous with that. Contrast this with the partier. The partier thinks that having lots of money and being able to party with it, that's the most important thing. Being able to eat the best food, that's what life is all about. The partier is somebody who does value fame. They enjoy it. But the main reason why they like fame is that if you're famous, you can get money. The partier values fame, but they value it as a means to getting money. Contrast that with the socialite, who values money as a means to getting fame. And now we're going to take a break because my dog is barking at the mailman. Go. And so that's an important difference between someone whose soul is ruled by the appetitive part as opposed to someone whose soul is ruled by the spirited part. If your soul is ruled by the appetitive part, then you see other pleasures as mostly good because they're instrumental towards getting appetitive goods. And if your soul is ruled by the spirited part, then you see other goods as mostly instrumental towards getting spirited goods. Now, this is important. Let's talk about what it is for a soul to be ruled by the rational part, the part of you that seeks the overall calculated good. What is it for that to be in charge, or for that part to rule, just given this definition? Well, to start, Socrates describes it as the element we learn with, and says that it's wholly straining to know where the truth lies. The idea is that this part of you that wants the overall calculated good, it takes pleasure in how everything fits together. The pleasure of doing what you know you ought is, according to Plato, of a kind with the pleasure of contemplation. The pleasure of contemplation is the pleasure of the rational part of the soul. That is, thinking about or sort of gazing at intellectually the truth. And this is really important because the person who's ruled by the rational part of the soul, even though we call it the rational part, is not more intelligent than other personality types, according to Plato. It's not that the rationally souled person is smarter, or that if a person is ruled by their desire for the overall calculated good, the part that we learn with, right, that they're somehow more intelligent than someone else. That's not it at all. Remember, parts of the soul are drives or sets of desires. If a person is ruled by the rational part of the soul, that says something about what they like the most, what they enjoy the most. It doesn't say what they're good at, although, of course, those things can interact. But you can have somebody who, as Plato puts it, are bad but clever, how keen the vision of their little soul is, and how sharply it distinguishes the things it is turned toward. You can have someone who is very calculating and very good at it, but their most powerful desire is for fame. Or maybe just to have the very best food.
These white slippers are albino, African, endangered rhino.
Or you could have someone who isn't bright in any conventional sense, who isn't intelligent in any conventional sense, but they are nonetheless ruled by the rational part. The greatest pleasure they take in life is just doing what they know they ought, right? Just doing what they think is right and thinking about how that's a good thing and just seeing how it all fits together in what little way they can, right? That's a person who's not intelligent, we might say, but ruled by the rational part, and we can contrast that with someone who is intelligent, who's not ruled by the rational part. So again, being ruled by the rational part has nothing to do with intelligence. That's not what it's about. Whether a part rules in your soul is a matter of what you find the most pleasant, what you really live for, what you think is worth pursuing most in life, and what you orient your life towards as far as its pleasures are concerned. if weakness of the will occurs when some part wins a conflict against the rational part, and if rulership is a matter of which part wins all the time, there might be some psychic structures which are more closely associated with being weak-willed. More on that in a second. Now, we know, of course, from reading Plato that he thinks many different parts can rule in a soul, and it leads to a variety of different psychic personality types that he enumerates in Book 8. But this is not a matter that he lacks an opinion on. He thinks that there's a certain part, the rational part, which should be ruling. Now, why does he think that? Fortunately, he tells us. Around 441e, Socrates asks, then, isn't it appropriate for the rationally calculating element to rule, since it is really wise and exercises foresight on behalf of the whole soul? Foresight. What's that? Well, it's thinking ahead. It thinks ahead for the whole soul. That's why it should rule. That's the reasoning, or that's the argument that Socrates presents in Book 4. The idea is that one of the parts can be in charge, and the one that should be in charge is the rational part, because it alone can do something. There's something it can do that the other parts cannot do, and that's exercise foresight on behalf of the entire soul. The idea, I guess, is that other parts of the soul can't do that. So let's think about this for a second. What he's saying is that your appetitive desires, your hunger, your thirst, your libido, those drives do not contain within them an element of calculation. The fact of your wanting food does not include a consideration of whether it's good. If you want any proof of this, consider the fact that your hunger persists even when you know it's not good to eat. That shows that your hunger is not something that's sensitive to what's good. It does not deliberate on behalf of anything. Now, the spirited part, it involves maybe a little bit of deliberation. The spirited part wants the entire soul to be thought of as good by others. Your desire for fame, or your desire for popularity, or your desire to not be disliked by others, that social desire does involve thinking about what others are thinking. So, social desires, the spirited part of the soul, its desire involves a little bit of deliberation, but it doesn't involve deliberation on behalf of the whole. You might know that you'll be popular if you talk back to the judge in the courtroom. You might get some revenge. But if you know that it's bad to do that, that won't automatically stop your desire for revenge. Your desire for revenge will continue regardless of whether it's good. In that sense, the spirited part of the soul does not deliberate about the whole soul or the good of the whole thing. Only the rational part of the soul, because its aim precisely is the overall good, actually thinks about the other parts. When someone wants the overall calculated good, what they want is, well, for the appetitive part of the soul to get what it wants, and the spirited part of the soul to get what it wants, and for everyone to get what they want, but in the measure that everything allows. That's what the rational part of the soul wants. And so by definition, it does take into account everything else. It's as if Plato is asking this: who should be in charge? Someone who takes everything into account? Or someone who doesn't take anything into account except for themselves? Or maybe nothing at all? And so there's the idea that the rational part should rule because it alone has the capacity to deliberate on the whole soul's behalf. The rational part alone can deliberate on the whole soul's behalf. If the rational part alone can deliberate on the whole soul's behalf, then the rational part should be the one in charge. It should rule. So the rational part should be the one in charge. It should rule. That's Plato's argument for thinking that the rational part should be in charge. Now, let's move from Platonic psychology and rulership within the soul and move over to the question of what, according to Platonic psychology, it is to have an honest and fair character, what it is to be an honest and fair person in terms of Platonic psychology. Now, let's grant Plato a pair of contentious assumptions just for the sake of reading the Republic. Let's assume, first, that being an honest and fair person is a personality trait. Or if, as Plato writes at 443 c5-ish, that justice is not concerned with someone's doing his own job on the outside. On the contrary, it is concerned with what is inside, with oneself, and that it can be captured in terms of Plato's psychic parts. What would it be? Glaucon and Socrates think that the just personality type, the honest and fair person, cannot be a soul in which appetite or spirit rules. And there's an important reason for this. If appetite rules in a person, then that person's desire for appetitive goods is going to beat any other competing desire, any desire that might conflict with that, including the desire to do what they know they ought. And likewise for someone in whom the spirited part rules. If someone is ruled by the spirited part of their soul, if they see an opportunity for popularity and the only thing getting in the way is that it's not the right thing to do, well, they're not going to stop just because it's the right thing to do. The pleasure of popularity calls. No, in order to be someone whose personality is honest and fair, it has to be that the strongest desire in you is the desire for the overall calculated good. It's not that appetitively souled people or spirited people deliberately do bad things because of their psychic structure. It's not that somebody is going to do horrible things just because they like partying more than anything. No, the worry is more that if somebody likes partying more than anything, or if someone is psychically built to like fame and popularity more than anything, then there will be occasions in which they cannot get themselves to do what they know they ought. Their desire, the priority of that specific sort of non-rational pleasure, is going to get in the way of them actually doing what they know they ought. They will be weak-willed. But, hey, we're already starting to do exactly what Plato wants, which is blend together the topic of justice on one hand with the topic of weakness of the will on the other. And I hope that you can see what's coming at this point. Plato thinks that if you are an honest and fair person, there's a sense in which you are not going to suffer from weakness of the will. For the honest and fair person, according to Plato, is the person in whom the rational part rules. And if the rational part rules in someone, that means that it wins out all motivational conflicts. Given our definition of weakness of the will, which is that some part conflicts with the rational part and wins, it would follow that an honest and a fair person would never suffer from weakness of the will. Or maybe not never. It would be more appropriate to say that the person in whom the rational part rules is not chronically afflicted with weakness of the will. Let's talk about that. To put it simply, akrasia sucks. It's horrible. If you've ever struggled, or if you've known anyone who has ever struggled to just pursue a goal, where they get up and they say, today I'm not going to do the thing. I'm going to change it. I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to do the thing. And by the end of the day, they're doing the thing. They're doing it again. They're unable to even crawl out of this meager behavioral crevice, this rut in which they've found themselves. They try, but they can't. They're always struggling with themselves, and not just struggling and winning, struggling and failing. That's what chronic weakness of the will is, right? In less measures, it's still an obstacle to living well. I'm sure you've had the experience of deciding this summer, when I have some more free time, I'm going to learn a language, write a book, finish crocheting that thing, conquer the world, whatever it is, you may have a desire to do something in the future which requires sustained long-term effort. And that sustained long-term effort becomes difficult because although you know what you should be doing, you keep doing something else. Weakness of the will, right? The pain of not being able to follow through with your own plans. The pain of not being able to pull yourself out of bad habits. That is the life pain of having akrasia. That is the life pain of weakness of the will. Or consider the phenomenon of having to get yourself to do something that you should do anyway, right? You know that you should study, but now, in addition to having to study, you have to get yourself to do it. It's like an additional task beyond the studying, getting yourself, right? Or eating healthy. There's the difficult task of eating healthy, and then in addition, if you're not already prone to doing it, there's getting yourself. Just consider the pain and the hardship of just the annoyance of having to get yourself. Wouldn't it be easier to just do, or even to just enjoyably do the things that you right now have to get yourself to do? Well, if you're identifying with what I'm saying, then you know why weakness of the will is a horrible thing for life. And now you can identify with Plato when he claims that what's really awesome is being free from that, or at least mostly free from it. Free from it in all but the most dire of heroic circumstances, right? And that's what a life of honesty will get you, he thinks. Not just doing a few honest things or tokenistically performing honesty, but having an honest character. The benefit to actually being an honest person, thinks Plato, is that you do not suffer from being unable to do what you want. So here's what remains for Plato to do. So far, if Plato is right, it looks like we have a way to defend justice as being connected to happiness. Is that if you are an honest and fair person, then you will not suffer from weakness of the will. You will be able to truly pursue whatever it is that you want, and you will be able to truly indulge in the pleasure of contemplation. But so what, might say an objector? Suppose that somebody claims, more specifically than so what, suppose that they claim that they enjoy the pleasures of appetite, they enjoy the pleasures of partying, or maybe they enjoy the pleasures of fame so much that it's worth it to be chronically weak-willed. Suppose somebody says, hey, there's give and take. I realize that by being addicted to fame, or by being addicted to partying, I'm not able to control myself. And when I wake up in the morning, I'm not able to pull myself out of my bad habits, and I can't always pursue long-term goals. But hey, it's worth it. The pleasure of fame is worth it, or the pleasure of partying is worth it. What should Plato say to that detractor? Well, to respond to them, he's going to need to say something about pleasure and which pleasure is most choice-worthy, and we're going to actually return to that part of Book 9 in which we discussed ruling in terms of pleasure. So, thanks for watching, everyone. We're going to get back to Book 9 next time. Stay tuned. Goodbye.